North Carolina is a strange state. With just two exceptions, it's gone to Republicans for president every election for 50 years straight. But last year, in 2024, something strange happened. While Democrats were getting crushed across the country, North Carolina stood out as a blue dot in a sea of red. There, a Democrat won the governor's race by 15 points. And Democrats also won the attorney general and lieutenant governor positions too. So, what's going on in North Carolina? And what does it mean for 2026, 2028, and beyond? To help us unpack that, I'm joined by someone who's been tracking these trends closer than just about anyone, Blair Reeves. Blair Reeves is the founder of Carolina Forward, a group that's been at the forefront of progressive strategy and data in the state. Blair, thanks so much for coming on. So, my first question for you is what happened in 2024? Why did Democrats do so well in North Carolina?
So Trump won North Carolina in 24. He won by about 3 points. In 2020, Trump won. So he's won North Carolina now 3 times. At the same time, at each election, you have Democrats down ballot also winning. So in 2016 and 2020, you had Governor Roy Cooper winning both times for governor. You had other Democrats, on the kind of council of state, those executive positions also winning. You had Democrats doing reasonably well in legislative elections, even though we have some of the most gerrymandered legislative maps in the entire country. And so North Carolina, going all the way back to like Jesse Helms in the 70s, has had this bifurcated voting behavior where people vote pretty Republican on federal races and very Democratic on state races. And that gap is narrowing over time. But that's a very historic pattern we see in every election. And Cooper is a good example. He won the governorship in 16 and 20, both on ballots that Donald Trump also won. Josh Stein was our attorney general. Now Governor Josh Stein won each time on a Trump ballot, which is pretty remarkable. And you mentioned Stein's 15-point win. That's the biggest landslide victory for a Democrat or really any candidate in modern North Carolina history, going back to 45 years or something like that. And that really speaks a lot to not only Josh Stein's quality and skills as a candidate, but also Mark Robinson. We can talk about all you want about him as well. And North Carolina is really interesting because it is, unlike a lot of other kind of purpley, sunbelty kind of states. You think about Georgia, you think about Texas, if you kind of squint, maybe Arizona, a state like that. In North Carolina, not only are Democrats kind of winning statewide, but they're also winning at a lot of races at the state level too. So, both statewide and legislative races as well. And, North Carolina we have a very, very long history of partisan gerrymandering, mainly Republican, but both sides for a long time. And Democrats actually controlled state government entirely for more than a century until 2010, that big 2010 midterm election when, Obama's first midterm, when Republicans, I think, flipped, I want to say it was 12 state legislatures. It could be, in that kind of neighborhood, but North Carolina's was one of them. And that one election has changed our politics ever since.
That is really interesting that you say that there was Democratic majorities all over North Carolina up until 2010. Whenever Republicans were winning presidential elections almost every single time since the 70s, the exceptions are 1976 and then 2008 by 0.35% for Barack Obama, the narrowest of any of the swing states there. So there was a big period of time where people were showing up to the polls and voting for the Republicans at the federal level, but voting for state level Democrats.
Right, and a couple of times they would we had some Democratic senators as well, but there's also a timing issue here as well. So you have a big senatorial elections where 2020 is a good example of that. 22 is a good example of that. In 2020, we have Thom Tillis going up against Cal Cunningham. And I'm not sure how far back your political memory serves here, but Cal Cunningham, the very last couple of weeks of the campaign, discovered to be at that moment carrying on an affair with some random woman somewhere. That news drops. If it hadn't been for that, I think Cal Cunningham probably is a U.S. senator today. So Democrats have also just caught a bunch of really bad breaks in 22. They hit Biden's first midterm. That did not go very well in a lot of ways. So you keep going back for that. But yeah, there's a federal and state split in North Carolina. There's a difference in how voters in North Carolina perceive both parties. We live in a nationalized political environment today. A lot of North Carolina voters do perceive the Republican Party as being identical to the national brand. They don't perceive the Democrats as being identical to the national brand. Some people do, but a meaningful share of voters do not. And call that, we're not Maryland, we're not Massachusetts, we're not California. And obviously that's one narrative that the right likes to kind of portray, but a lot of voters just don't necessarily see it that way.
Well, I think there's at least one instance of them thinking differently of their state level Republicans and their federal level Republicans, which must be this last election where we talked about there's this 15-point difference. Right. Josh Stein was a good candidate, but we know that the primary culprit of such a huge gap was probably Mark Robinson's character and background. Can you talk a little bit about Mark Robinson and what made him such a uniquely terrible candidate?
He's a really fascinating kind of just political character, right? So, Mark Robinson, burst onto the scene 2019. He's working in like a warehouse or something like that in Greensboro. And he had for several years until that point, he had a hard time holding a job. His wife was supporting him through this series of businesses that they had, which were pockmarked with failure and fraud in a lot of ways and a lot of other stuff. And he goes to this like Greensboro City Council meeting. There had just been a week or two before a big mass shooting. I forget which one it was. Might have been Las Vegas. And there was a big gun show that was planned for that weekend in the city, and the city leaders said maybe we should postpone this thing just out of sensitivity for victims or whatever. And he gives this like kind of impromptu speech where he basically says, why do we law-abiding gun owners have to be punished when somebody does something stupid with a gun or whatever. It later came out that actually he did not own a gun at that point. He was kind of just he was lying about it for a self-aggrandizement or whatever. But he makes a speech, and Mark Robinson is a very good orator. Like he's very charismatic. He has a very kind of powerful baritone kind of voice, and he portrays himself really powerfully in a lot of ways. And so he gives a speech. It goes viral on YouTube. The NRA picks it up. They broadcast it everywhere. I think it goes on Fox News. And after that, he's recruited to run for office. The Republican Party in 2019, leading into the 2020 cycle, does not have a candidate in place for lieutenant governor. There are people who want to run, but Mark Robinson says, I'll run for lieutenant governor in North Carolina. Why the heck not? In the state of North Carolina, the lieutenant governor position doesn't do very much. Very, very little. They preside over the Senate. That's pretty much it. And even there, the job is very...
They're like the vice president at the federal level.
It's actually less than the vice president, but they get good digs. They get a great salary, all the stuff. And so he runs and he wins. And this, again, it's kind of a perfunctory position. It's usually the tradition in North Carolina is the lieutenant governor is getting ready to run for governor. And Mark Robinson really, you can say it's positive, negative, really transforms the office of lieutenant governor. He begins doing a statewide speaking tour. He doesn't really do the job. There are state commissions, state boards the lieutenant governor sits on. He theoretically presides over the Senate as an officer. He will break ties in the state Senate. But we have a Republican supermajority at that point, or not supermajority, just majority, one seat or two seats shy of a supermajority. So there are no ties to break. He barely shows up for work. And later on, when he ran for governor in 24, this was remarked upon how all the attendance stuff there, he just never goes to work. He tours the state, he begins building a national profile, doing fundraising. He's the biggest speaker on the circuit, makes a lot of money, raises notoriety for saying a lot of really outlandish stuff, mostly about gay people, about trans people, about women, really kind of about people of color, remarkably enough. Does all this for quite a while and builds this kind of this brand of notoriety. for being really out there, saying really nasty stuff. He gets a lot of attention for that. And then finally, he turns the MAGA base into his base. So coming into 24, people found him a very polarizing figure. But the calmer heads, and this you see this in a lot of places. So Arizona has Blake Masters, right? We saw this in Georgia, Herschel Walker. I mean, you have a candidate quality problem that the MAGA base has. The MAGA really gets behind these incredibly polarizing and negative and gross and very unappealing candidates who their base just loves. They want to hear it. And that happened in North Carolina. He had two opponents in the Republican primary for governor in 24. Neither one put up any real resistance. He was the runaway favorite. I think he won his primary by 40 points or something like that. So there's no real opposition to Mark Robinson. And Josh Stein, was obviously the Democratic nominee. And even before, all the stuff hit, there was a presumption that Josh Stein had built a brand over a long time. He'd been Attorney General. Who's pretty moderate North Carolina Democrat, wasn't a barn burner or anything like that, but did a pretty good job. The interesting part here is that a guy like Mark Robinson has a million skeletons in his closet. It did not take very much to go grab some of it, but then all the stuff hit. Nude Africa, the forums he was posting on, the stuff he was posting on there, just kind of, you gotta bleach your eyes a little bit if you read or look at any of it. And after that, it just killed him. He still won. And I tell people, remember this, he still won 42% of the vote. So it's not like he, a lot of the Republican base still voted for him. But the combination of his unique negativity and probably being a black Republican probably did not help him in the Republican base. There were some voters who did not vote for him. Especially in a lot of rural counties, did not vote for him. And he lost. I should say Josh Stein won by the biggest landslide margin in 45 years.
It's remarkable how quickly you skimmed over all of the very interesting details about what Mark Robinson did.
We can talk about the details. I'm not sure how it's a family friendly podcast.
Well, but Nude Africa is as it sounds, it's a porn website for African Americans. He talked about sexual fantasies with what was his wife's sister. He described himself as a black Nazi. Mm-hmm. And yes, as you mentioned, 40% of Republicans were like, we don't really care. I generously assume that a lot of them just had no idea who he was because, down ballot name recognition.
Oh, no, that's not true. Everyone knows who Mark Robinson is.
Seriously.
I mean, if he was running for lieutenant governor, he's running for secretary of state or whatever, that would be correct. But he's at the top, governor's race, top of the ballot.
Yeah, but I feel like if I talk to Texans on the street, about Greg Abbott, they don't really know any sort of details. I suppose Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, is a lot more boring by comparison. So maybe Mark Robinson's a bigger personality.
Yeah, no, everyone knows who Mark Robinson also just got an enormous amount. He generated a lot of news coverage. So his name rack was very high. It's actually higher than Josh Stein's.
So I assume that the line for the Republicans who supported Mark Robinson was that these allegations were not true, right? Because Mark, he didn't apologize. I don't remember. At least initially he said, these are just fictitious allegations. It's all fake news. Was that kind of the justification, the mindset there?
Basically, yeah. So Mark says, 1, they're fake news. 2, they're a smear by CNN and so forth. And 3, it's AI. It's all AI created. He actually he retains counsel. he hires. This is the final weeks of the campaign, by the way. He hires attorneys to go file a defamation lawsuit against CNN to get to the bottom of all this, to do an investigation. He wants to know. Obviously, after the election, that defamation lawsuit is dropped. The whole thing is kind of just they quit. He paid off the lawyers and they left. Nothing ever happened with that. Everyone, I mean, and the other thing is that after the allegations hit and the CNN story came out, almost his entire staff quit the next day. The last weeks of his campaign was literally Mark and like one other guy. That's as like a major gubernatorial campaign. They had no more money. The state Republican Party establishment actually abandoned them because, you know, a major state gubernatorial race like North Carolina, you have a lot of national funders. You have the Chamber of Commerce, you have Duke Energy, you have GoPac, you have the Club for Growth. You have these major super PACs that are national that are trying to win these races. They all abandoned them. The state Republican Party stopped returning his calls.
Did they criticize him? Did they say this guy?
They wouldn't. They're not going to criticize him, but they refused. But they redirected the money into other races.
I see. Yeah, I mean, even Trump, which was really pro Robinson, seemed to
Trump stopped. Say he didn't. He wouldn't put him on stage at his rallies.
Yeah, that's tough.
The interesting part here is that a real enmity had over time ginned up between Tom Tillis, our U.S. senators, been one of the few who voted against the big beautiful bill Trump Budget Act to no avail. By the way, it didn't change the outcome at all, and we can talk about that if you want to. Between Tillis and Mark Robinson, and there's a lot of people who think that Tillis might have been responsible for feeding some of that oppo. I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah,
that poor staffer found that was scrolling through New Africa to find that. I really do wonder how you find these kind of things. Mark Robinson's vocal, and he's in my feed again. He's talking about how he's going to run for Senate because Tom Tillis, after voting no on Trump's big, beautiful bill, has announced that he is retiring. Mm-hmm. There are also rumors that Laura Trump will be running.
Yeah.
She's one of the co-chairs of the RNC, if I understand properly.
I think she was. I think she was either the chair or a co-chair. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they called her the chair. I think it's because it's better headlines, but I think they had multiple. Yeah, so, okay. What do we think about this upcoming Senate primary for Tillis's seat? Does Mark Robinson pull it away? Does Laura, does she run? Does she win? And then what do we think is the dynamic based on one of them winning for the Democrats and the direction that race goes?
So, I mean, the North Carolina Republican Party has not told me, so I don't know. But right now, so the thing about the Republicans in North Carolina, they have a pretty deep bench. Because again, our congressional maps are incredibly gerrymandered. So I think we have a 10-4 map right now, or maybe 11-3. I had to count it up a little bit. Maybe I think it's 11-3. And so we have a lot of Republican members of Congress right now, and none of them have ever run a competitive race. And you have these guys sitting in like R+6, R+10 districts. And they think they're hot shit because they keep crushing their races. Like we have Tim Moore as one of our new members of Congress. He's from North Carolina, and I forget which district it is. It's down in just west of Charlotte. And he's the Speaker of the House for 10 years and served in our state house for almost 20 years. He drew his own district, and people talk about running him for Senate. I don't know really why he wanted to go to Congress, but he's there now. And Laura Trump is probably one of the top names that have been floated. I don't think Mark is going to run. And I think the reason for that is because people have told him, you lost by 15 points. You're going up against probably the most popular North Carolina politician since Terry Sanford. That's going to be a really hard thing for you to do, and he probably won't win a primary.
You're going to let the deep state win, Mark?
It seems like a lost opportunity. I think there's
Mark,
also
please run.
There are also some people who are calling on the state Republican Party to cancel the primary, and just say whoever Trump picks, let Trump pick the person.
That's crazy. That's legal.
Well, they can do it. They can choose whatever process they want to. That's what the Democrats did with Kamala Harris. And a lot of the same people who criticize that, by the way, are now saying just let Trump pick the nominee, which is what it is.
I think in some states the actual primary process is outlined by law in like a very strict terms. I know at least in the state of Texas, so many party procedures are actually just based on statute.
Mm-hmm. The same is true in North Carolina, but they can just change the law whenever they want to.
Okay, so they would just change the law, but what stops Josh Stein from just vetoing that stupid law?
Um, I mean,
Like, I
Rudy,
guess he would actually like the law. He says, "Oh yeah, let them pick Laura Trump, or like let them pick like probably a worse candidate."
well, so this
Um,
this is the thing. So right now, between 2023 to 2025, that last legislative biennium that we just came out of, the Republicans in North Carolina held a supermajority in our state legislature, so they didn't need a veto. So Roy Cooper's last 2 years in office, he had no power to veto anything because they held supermajority. This year, Democrats, I should say, in the 24 election, beginning January 25, of course, Democrats broke the supermajority in our state House. So Josh Stein now faces a Republican supermajority in our state Senate. That's a 2030 split there. So it's only a one-seat supermajority, but they do hold a supermajority. In our state House, though, the Democrats hold the Republicans are one seat shy. So Stein can hold a veto in the House theoretically if everyone shows up and the whole caucus votes with him. And right now he's vetoing bills, and we haven't seen an override vote yet. But people are, given the composition of the caucus, people think that Stein can probably hold a lot of these vetoes. Maybe he can't hold all of them, but he can hold a lot of them. And that has already changed kind of some of the bills that are passing through our legislature, what they want to do, and that sort of thing.
right, that makes sense. So TBD. Okay, maybe in a few months we'll make another episode about how Laura Trump is running for office.
Well, the other issue is that depending on your mental model for the Republican Party right now, is basically a cult of personality. It's all about Trump, and what Trump really cares about, he doesn't care about ideology, really. He cares about control. He cares about people he can crack the whip and they're going to do what he says. So, for example, Ted Budd, our other senator from North Carolina, he's a Trump guy. Trump cracks the whip, Bud will do whatever he wants. Tillis is not really, he's kind of there. Tom Tillis does not have much of a spine. But in this case, he held back on this vote. And he didn't do that, by the way, in a way that changed the outcome. Like, I don't want people to get the impression that Tom Tillis had some profile and courage here, because he did not. He failed us, and he didn't stop anything. But are you going to get that from Laura Trump? Laura Trump is probably a rubber stamp for Trump, and I think everyone's very clear about that. All the other names they're talking about here are probably the same, and they're saying they're the same in terms of being a rubber stamp, but they're not in Trump. So I honestly, though, I think that if Roy Cooper wins, he probably beats anyone they run.
Right. So now you're talking about the other part, which is the Democratic primary. Roy Cooper's obviously been floated because he's no longer governor. He was a really strong vice presidential contender, very close with Kamala Harris. Did very well in the media. For a time, I really thought it was going to be him. So of course, he's a fitting candidate for the Senate primary. Is there anybody else that's really highly notable? And what was Roy Cooper's time in office as governor like? Did he have any sort of significant accomplishments that really broke through to people?
Oh, hey, he had a huge one. He expanded Medicaid. After 13 years of opposition by the Republican legislature, he finally got them to expand Medicaid in 2023. And basically the trade there was basically school vouchers. They passed a universal, really bad voucher bill. And Cooper did not like it. I think he fought it, but they made a deal. They did, they were going to do that. They did Medicaid expansion. Republicans' opposition to Medicaid expansion softened over time, but it took them 10 years to get them there. And what people also don't, outside North Carolina, might not know is that Roy Cooper has never lost an election. He was our attorney general in North Carolina for 16 years. He won that office in 2000. And he won 2000, 2004, 08, 12, and then in 16, he finally ran for governor. And then he won back-to-back 16 and 20. So, and before that, before he became attorney general, he was in the state Senate. Roy Cooper literally has never lost an election. He is a uniquely talented political leader. He was very successful as governor. People love Roy Cooper. And you look at all the polling on this, he's probably since Jim Hunt, probably the most popular North Carolina, political leader we've had, period. And so if he has not announced that he is running. He said he's strongly considering it right now. I don't know what that means, but I think if he runs, I think he wins.
Yeah, I don't see how he doesn't win a primary, and I think he'd
Oh,
be very
I don't
strong
mean the
state.
primary. I mean the race.
Yeah, the Senate race.
If,
I
if, he,
think
if,
versus
he, if, he,
Lord
if
Trump.
he announces that he's running, there is no primary.
Yeah, everybody just like I'm I'm done with that. Yeah. I think that North Carolina Democrats are doing pretty well for themselves. I know Jeff Jackson, I think he's been a fantastic candidate. He was in Congress, the TikTok congressman.
TikTok guy,
and now he is attorney general, using TikTok less. Which is disappointing for some of us, but he's been doing a very good job as attorney general. I have a question about the demographic and political trends in North Carolina. Looking back on previous elections, I see that Trump did best in North Carolina out of his 3 times in 2016. It narrowed the most in 2020. Actually, he got less than 50%, and the margin expanded a little bit. He was around 51% in this last election.
Right.
Of course, there's some nationwide trends here. So if you look at how well North Carolina's doing relative to the national average, I think North Carolina actually was better for Democrats compared to the national average in this last election than any election preceding, or at least the same. So why does it seem like North Carolina is actually becoming a bit bluer over time?
Yeah. So the big question about North Carolina, first of all, like, Democrats have to show that they can win federally. They have not won a federal race. They won a Senate race. They haven't won for president since 2008. And there's been a lot of hope kind of floated. Every year it's like this. And all the polling every year is like, comes down to 50-50. And every year we basically have a margin of error election. And the thing that distinguishes North Carolina is that we are a very inelastic state. So all of the growth out there, I mean, the coalitions are very tightly matched, 50-50. And so it's all about, it's turnout. For the Democrats, they got to turn out Wake County, which is Raleigh, and Mecklenburg County, which is Charlotte. And we have about 4 or 5 metro areas in North Carolina. You got to turn out your voters there. For the Republicans, it's all the rural counties. We're a very rural, state in a lot of ways. We have a lot of rural counties. They have a lot of voters in them. They're all getting older, and just like everywhere else. But there's a lot of voters there, and so can you turn them out? There are a handful of counties that are really in flux, and most of those are trending towards Democrats. But the big question has always been, like, when are they going to trend enough to do that? The same question is out there with Texas, right? When is Texas going to change enough to get it towards the Democrats? And the big difference between us is that North Carolina is closer to actually changing at the state level as well as federally as well. Our maps are very gerrymandered. So if we had fair maps today, I think Democrats probably control one, if not both, chambers of our legislature. But we are, where Wisconsin was a couple of years ago, North Carolina has been for years. And that's it goes into our state Supreme Court and the gerrymandering stuff here. But I think a lot of that history of partisan gerrymandering that really holds Democrats back here obscures for a national audience just how competitive North Carolina's politics are. And unlike Florida's kind of veered off to the right. And a lot of that has to do with who is moving to Florida and the particular kind of racial demographics they have there. North Carolina has a very different kind of profile, people who are moving here, people who live here in the first place, that really augurs pretty well for Democrats. I do think that 26 is going to be we were hoping to get a really good indicator one way or the other in 24, and we just didn't. It was just straight down the middle. It's very frustrating. But I think 26 will be a really good example. And if Democrats can't seal the deal in 26, I think it's going to be a really tough road for them.
Yeah. So in the case of Texas, we're very gerrymandered as well. And a lot of our hopes for turning Texas blue were based on this idea that kind of the demographic vote share, like Hispanics going to Democrats at a certain rate, African Americans, and so on and so forth, was going to be stagnant. And so as we had more Hispanics, and as more people were coming into the state, and we urbanized, all the demographic trends would hold, and then Texas would be blue as can be, right? Unfortunately, we saw in this last election a huge shift amongst Hispanics.
Yeah.
those kind of numbers we were getting whenever Beto ran the first time and lost by like 1.8 points, those are just not the same vote shares we were getting. Now, I think North Carolina is actually on the other side of this equation because while Democrats have been doing worse with Hispanics, African Americans, really people in color, people of color generally, Democrats have actually made progress with white people and
Yeah.
white educated people. Like they've just kind of squeezed them out, like to get like even a higher vote share. I think in some places, Kamala actually did even better with white people than she did than Biden did it previously. Is North Carolina like a very white state?
We're a very diverse state. So if you look at like our neighbors, for example, Georgia and Virginia. So North Carolina's demographics, I think are, black voters are, I want to say 10 points more as a proportion of the voting electorate in North Carolina versus Virginia. So we're
Virginia is very white.
well, it's very white, but also it's a very southern. There's a lot of black voters in Virginia. I mean, it is it's a southern state, right? You got to be really clear about that. But Northern Virginia is very, very white. Hampton Roads is not very white, but it's different parts. North Carolina, I want to say black voters are somewhere around 22% of the voting share. I could be wrong about where exactly that is. And in Georgia, I think that they're way ahead of us in terms of black voters as a proportion of the whole electorate. And so that has changed kind of like the vote share there. I mean, we're a southern state, so like there's a lot of racial polarization in our politics. So black voters extremely likely to be Democrats, vote Democratic. White voters much more likely to vote Republican. There's actually Hispanic voters, I want to say, are only about 2% of the voting share in North Carolina.
That's so different than here.
we just don't have a lot of and a lot of Hispanic eligible voters are not registered in North Carolina. But even still, Hispanic voters are just not a very large share of the electorate here.
Right, which means like the fundamental adverse trend which affected Texas hasn't affected North Carolina. We're a majority minority state now. The Hispanic population is enormous.
Well, same like Florida. Florida is also a very different kind of like many different Latino sects in Florida. Yeah, and we just don't have that here.
So my final question for you is, your organization has put forward this narrative that North Carolina is one of the most, if not the most important political battleground for Democrats to succeed in. Why do you think that's the case? Like, make your final case on like why you think it's so important for us to focus on North Carolina.
Okay. So if you don't live in North Carolina, here is why North Carolina matters. One, we are we are as a purple red state. We are much closer to flipping for the Democrats than pretty much any other purple state. So you look at like the blue wall states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, even those states are probably they're always going to be competitive. Democrats can win them, and they probably should be winning them, and they probably will in the future. But those states are also are graying. People are moving, they're shrinking. People are moving out of them. You go to like the Sunbelt states, us, Georgia, Arizona, states like this. North Carolina is a very big state. We're 11 million people now. We're much, much bigger than Wisconsin, than Arizona. I think we have we have a lot of electoral votes. We have 16 electoral votes. So we also matter more than Arizona do. That does. So we're very, very close to moving that way. The reason why Republicans have a majority in the House of Representatives today is because they rigged our maps. Is because we had a 7-7 map, 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and they rigged the map to give themselves an 11-3 map, and that's why a 10-4 map, not 11-3, 10-4. Don Davis, Deb Ross, Fouché, and Adams. And so with those extra members, that's why the Republicans have a majority in the state house today. When Democrats do eventually take control of our state Supreme Court and they strike down those maps, much as they did in Wisconsin, they're going to force fair congressional maps. And a 7-7 map is pretty fair. We're a 50-50 state. That's probably where it should be. Maybe the Republicans can win 8 seats. Maybe the Democrats can win 8 seats. I don't know what that necessarily is, but it's going to be a much fairer map than the 10-4 map. So, and right now, almost none of those seats are competitive. We have one competitive congressional district in the entire state, and that is Don Davis in Eastern North Carolina, brilliant leader out there. So you have that. Once that moves and we have fair maps, I think Democrats are probably going to begin winning one, if not both, of North Carolina Senate seats. If you look at the Senate map, I know Matt Iglesias talks about this all the time. Like, what's the path to 51 votes, let alone 60 votes in the Senate? You have to win North Carolina's Senate seats. You have to win other states as well, but you just don't get there with Pennsylvania and keeping Wisconsin or whatever else. You got to win North Carolina seats, and so they're going to do that. And then, kind of a larger point than that, if Democrats can show that they win back control of a purplish red state like North Carolina, and exactly as they did in Virginia, when Democrats won control of Virginia's legislature after, I want to say, 24 years in the wilderness, the first thing they did was they banned partisan gerrymandering. They passed independent redistricting reform, and they established some bona fides there. If Democrats can do that again in North Carolina, that's a really bulletproof case for us there. In the last 15 years, the Republicans in North Carolina have really used our state as a test bed, as a laboratory, to export a lot of the nonsense you see elsewhere. They did that with vouchers. They did that with flattening our tax code. A lot of the regulatory stuff you see happening right now in other states began in North Carolina. And they're going to continue doing that. And this is where you break their power, here in North Carolina. Once you do it in North Carolina, then that provides a roadmap to begin doing it in Georgia and Texas and other states.
And my last addition to your case is that I'm really tired of us focusing on Midwest issues because they're the swing states. We have to talk about trade policy and NAFTA and farmers all the time. Let's talk about some Southern issues, okay? I'm not really fully sure what those are, but I really want us to talk about something else, and probably stuff I care about more because I'm from the South.
We do cool stuff with housing here. You should try it.
Yes. Talk about things like that. Maybe some energy stuff. I find that interesting. Yeah. Blair, thank you so much for coming on. This was super enlightening. Folks, make sure if you're in North Carolina or you're interested in how to flip North Carolina blue, move it in a more progressive direction, you go support his organization. It will be linked in the description below. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We're going to be producing conversations like these every 3 or 4 days so that we can all become more informed about politics together.